Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session, Understanding and Communicating the Science of Good Page Design. I want to introduce you today's presenter, Bruce Farrell, who is Proposal Director of Plante Moran. A recorded version of this webinar will be available on the Zbizlink website under Resources tab. We would love to hear from you. If you have any question, please feel free to reach us at info@zbizlink.com. So now I welcome to Bruce Farrell and hand over to him for his session.
Thank you very much. So again, I'm here today to talk about page design, particularly what makes good design, and what is some of the thinking and theory behind it. One of the reasons we're here is to answer the question, why does good design even matter? Does it matter? There are some people who would dispute that. They're wrong, but they will. What are the elements of good design? And how can we communicate that? Because I think a lot of the battle that as a designer I fight is not so much with design, but convincing people that it matters and being able to communicate those ideas in a way that is succinct and clear. So a lot of times people will ask me, why did you make this change? Or why is this better? This looks better, but I don't understand why. And if you have the terminology to be able to communicate that, then you're better able to get advocates. You're better able to get people who understand that that there's good thinking and science behind it. That it's not just my opinion. It's based on valid, tested principles. So that's my hope today, is to give you some tools to not only be able to apply good design, but spread it and become an advocate for it. Fair warning, I'm not really going to be going through a lot of really high-end examples or anything like that. I'm going to try to keep them pretty small, pretty simple, because I think it's easier to display what I'm talking about if I do that. And actually, you shouldn't have to take notes. I actually have a leave behind that I will share with Amjad, and it'll have all the things that I'm talking about today in some level of detail, so you don't feel like you've got to take notes. Just soak it all in. I just want to do a quick introduction. I am Bruce Farrell. This is blonde Bruce Farrell back when he was young. I work for a company called Plante Moran, which is relatively jerk-free, or so they tell me. I live in Detroit, where we refer to Canada as our southern neighbor. I have a team in India, which is actually pretty great. It has its perks. I've been working in business communication for about 25 years, and I've had a mustache the entire time. I am on the international board for APMP, and I'm also on the Greater Midwest chapter board as well. I have been to the last 8 BIN proposal cons, and I've spoken at 6 of them. I have a wife who does not like to have her picture taken. I have a son, and I have a dog. I play a lot of music. These are some of the albums that I've put out. These are some of my favorite albums. Archer is my favorite TV show. These are some of my other shows. Love The Godfather, favorite movie Easy. Peter O'Toole is my favorite actor. I'm the biggest Lord of the Rings geek you're likely to meet. Bill Bryson is my favorite author now. My favorite color is blue. My wife's is pink. My son's is orange. And my dog's is squirrel. I like to collect memes because why wouldn't I? And especially in these times that we're living in, I'm finding great comfort that people are finding humor in this madness that we live in. I went to these 3 schools, I've been to these states, and I've been to these countries. Now, why would I start my presentation that way? We'll cover that at the end. But let me start with a question that I always begin when I talk about design is, why does design matter? And I don't have an audience, so I can't ask you guys, but often people will give me really good answers back. They'll say good design supports branding, because it does. They'll say it makes things easier to understand. It's easier to communicate clearly with good design. Those are all really good reasons. But what I like to tell people what I like to do first is give them this quote that Edward Tufte says that good design is clear thinking made manifest. It's the result of clear thinking and hard work. That's what goes into good design. And I would say, and I tell people that good design is evidence of care, okay? Because it takes time to develop something that is tied together, that looks professional. And when you do that, it tells your audience, you matter, you care, I put in this work. Conversely, if something is poorly designed and it's clearly been thrown together, what does that say? What does that say about your audience, how you feel about them? So you need to think about that when you're designing any document, presentation, or anything like that, that the level of effort that you put into it and thought will be known. It's evident. It's obvious. Because when you see something that's well designed, you know it. You don't need to know anything about the bridge building to know that the Golden Gate Bridge is beautiful and well designed, right? It's obvious. You see anything that's well designed, you just intuitively know that something is just well put together and a lot of thought went into it. And that's absolutely true of presentations, right? It's true of any printed doc, any screen docs that you have. If something is well put together, all tied together, branded properly, you don't even need to understand what branding is to recognize that it's a clean doc, right? That's why this matters, okay? That's why this matters. A lot of times when we're talking about good design, it's about clearly communicating, making the complex simple, right? That's part of good design, and that will give you an edge when you're delivering your presentation against anybody else. So the content may be the same, but if I can communicate it more clearly, more directly, I've got a leg up on everybody. It absolutely does matter. The goals that I have for good designs, a well-designed document, is first, it should be easy to scan. And when I say that, I mean, I can easily find what it is that I'm looking for. I can tell what the document hierarchy is. I don't need to hop around into 3 different sections to look for the one thing that I'm looking for. So it needs to be easy to scan. Obviously, it needs to be easy to read. When I say easy to read, I mean, not only should the prose, be easy to read and not at, some 18th grade level or something ridiculous like that, but the text needs to be easy to read. It needs to be spaced properly. It needs to be of a sufficient size. It can't be crowded onto the page where I have trouble finding the beginning of each line. Obviously, it should convey your brand. That should go without saying. It should fit the project and the client. I think we could all come up with examples of proposal documents that would be really good for one client and not so good for another. I write proposals for, state governments, county governments, and things like that. And that proposal that I will deliver to them is frequently not as splashy because they don't want that. And they will even come out and say, we don't want any marketing kind of stuff. Just tell us what you're going to do, and what it'll cost. Conversely, if I go to a tech company, I might give them something that's really high tech. We used to design websites, and our proposal was beautiful. It was landscape and had windows that you could open because that's a design-focused crowd. They want to know that you're creative. So fit your design to the project and the client. And then obviously, any really good design will make the complex simple, right? That's the goal of all of this, is to clearly communicate complex ideas so that your audience gets it, sees the value. I think you know that. I hope you know that. If you're in proposals, you should know that. But what I like to tell people, and I kind of like this picture, is I don't want them to go out the door looking like this. I don't want their materials to look like they're just not tied together, and they're not appropriate. I want my team to be tied together. I want my team to look like they're competent and like they belong. And the way I help them do that is by creating really clean documents that reflect the size and seriousness of the organization that I work for. So I want everybody to be tied together. You'll probably hear me say that a few times. Yet I still hear this. I still hear people who say, well, design is all a matter of opinion. It's all subjective. And while I understand people's instinct to think of design as some sort of artistic thing and that it's all a matter of taste, it's simply not true. There are reasons that good design is good design, and there are principles that you can apply to reliably get good design, and we're going to talk about those. And let me give you a tip for talking about this, that when I talk with people about good design, I will always qualify when I'm giving my opinion, and I will, as opposed to something that is evidence-based. Okay. So for example, if you ask me which of these fonts is better, they're both fine fonts. Helvetica is a great font. Arial's a great font. Go ahead and use them. I would probably use Helvetica, but that's my opinion. That's not based on anything measurable. There's nothing inherently better about it. They're equal fonts. However, if you ask me the difference whether to use Comic Book Sans or Helvetica, well, now I can venture out of opinion. Now I can objectively say this font will be taken less seriously. Certainly in a business document, you would never use Comic Book Sans, right? So here's one case. One case. This is my opinion. This is just my opinion. No, this is objectively better. Helvetica is objectively better than Comic Book Sans. So if you can make that distinction with people, you can help them see and gain trust in what you're giving them and know what they really need to listen to. Because if you just tell them if you treat the things that are opinion-based equally, you're going to lose their trust. What about this? And I like asking people this question: is it better? Are these two fonts the same? And the answer is, well, they're both fine fonts, but it depends on how you're using them. Because there is some evidence to say that for body text, a serifed font like Garamond is easier to read. So you're able to read more quickly with a serif font, and there are reasons for that. But it's not such a hard and fast rule, because a font like Garamond is a little dowdy and can look a little dated, whereas a sans serif font looks more modern, because that's what we see on the web. For years, you couldn't even really do serif fonts very well on the web. Anyway, so sometimes it's your opinion, sometimes it's not. Try to articulate that, and you'll be better off. Same thing goes for something like color. If somebody asked me which of these is better, I would say blue, because I like blue, but that's really my opinion. I don't think either one of these is objectively better. I think that you'd want to say, which one of these more closely aligns with our brand would be the answer to the question. Conversely, if I look at these two pages, I can objectively tell you the one on the left is better on the right. And you already know it. You look at it and say, well, it's obvious. Of course it's better. But why is it better? It's better because it's designed well. It's making use of contrast. It's making alignment. You've got things grouped together. This is objectively better, the one on the left, as opposed to the one on the right. So let's talk about the basic elements of good design, and then we'll work on conveying them to actual pages. I really wanted to get into the science of it. I'm not going to oversell that, because I'm not going to articulate it too sciencey, but we're going to talk about how your mind works a little bit. So when I talk about design principles, what differentiates good design is I'm going to talk a lot about the human eye. I really mean the brain, but the tool that your brain uses is your eyes. Okay, so we're going to talk about what your eye wants to do, where it wants to go, and how it processes information. And it's important to know that we are visual creatures and pattern seekers. That more than just about anything, that's what humans are. They visually process information and try to make sense of it. Our brain has much more resources dedicated to your eyes than all your other senses. Because again, we're visual creatures. And think about it, when you hear something, what do? You hear a sound over here, what do? Do you sniff? No, that's what a dog does. Because dogs have other senses. We look. We want to look and see everything because we're visual creatures. Because when you're out in nature, being able to see patterns becomes really, really important, right? If you want to know where you should want to put down your foot, all of these things make us process visual information in specific ways, and it's one of the reasons why optical illusions work so well. That if you show this to another animal, they won't see the dog, the cat, and the rabbit because they're not there. But we see them because we seek patterns. That's what we do. So keep that in mind. In light of these four principles that we're going to talk about, and this kind of drives the presentation, drives what I'm talking about, is we really think about four things when we talk about design, or at least I do. Then the first is contrast. And when I say contrast, your eye will be drawn to contrast. So if it's a different color, if it's a different, in a different place, a different shape, a different size, your eye will always be drawn to that. You'll always be drawn to contrast. So as a designer, I want to make use of that. I want to find ways to make use of that to help draw their eye to the things that I want them to see or they want to find. Okay. Second is repetition. So we like order. We like things that repeat. It's one of the reasons why document hierarchy is so important. We like things to line up in predictable ways. And when I see something like this, it's disorderly. It's hard for me to predict what would happen if I added a row or a column. Whereas if it's like this, now my brain sees this and likes it because I know if I add another row, it's going to be white, gray, and black. It's predictable. Okay, so keep that in mind. Alignment. We like things to line up. Kind of a foundational principle of design is that you shouldn't put anything on a page unless it's aligned to something else on the page. And if you have 3 or 4 elements and they're just kind of randomly put places, we don't know how to make sense of it. It is off-putting. That's much better. We like those clean lines. We like them that way. We like them that way. We like things to line up. Proximity is an easy one. If you see items that are together, you assume that they're related to each other. Okay, so I can tell without knowing anything that these 4 items are related to each other in the upper left, and these 2 are related to each other in the lower right. And I can probably assume that the 4 and the 2 aren't related to each other because they're about as far away as they can be in that space. Okay, so we will use proximity in presentations or any print design to show that things are related to each other, and it may be how they're related. Let's see this. So again, this is sometimes known by an acronym. If this helps you remember contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity, then good. That's how I learned it. So let's just talk about, go back to the eye and remember that the things that we're looking for are, again, contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity to make order, to identify key points. So let's just go through each one. Contrast is a really powerful tool because it helps differentiate elements and draws the eye to the page. Our eyes are drawn to items with the most contrast from the rest of the page. One of the ideas behind this is to avoid elements that are similar, and if you're going to have a contrast, just make it a bold contrast. Either keep things the same or bold contrast. So that's why, again, going back to these 2 pages, the page on the right has very little contrast. I don't know where to look. I don't know what's important particularly. The headings aren't different sizes, really. I think they're just about the same size. The font's different, but I can't tell. It's just a wash. There's no contrast. I don't know where to look. On the left, the hierarchy is very easy to understand. My eye will automatically be drawn to the top of the page, heading 1, because it's bold. It's much different than everything else on the page in color and in size. And then I'm going to be drawn to the sidebar because that sets apart as well. So when you're looking at this page, it's much, much easier to digest, and contrast is the main reason. And that can manifest itself in any ways. It's one of the reasons why good diagrams, if you throw color on a diagram, your eye will be drawn to that. It'll be the first thing you look at typically on this page would be the blah yada huh diagram. And obviously the header has a lot of contrast too. So that's what we talk about when we're talking about contrast. It's not so much to make something pretty, it's to draw the eye to what they want to find and what you want them to find. When we're talking about headings, I'm a big fan of bold headings. And again, the reason being contrast. That's why this isn't as good as this, because it clearly stands out. And that's what you want. You want things to stand out, especially if the hierarchy is really important. One thing I'll say, though, in kind of as a caution, is that you want to avoid too much contrast, too much going on. I used to work with a guy who loved to have color on the page as much as he could get. And while I get that, that might look pretty and it might be cool to look at, it's hard to navigate. It's hard to know where to look if you have too much stuff going on, if you have too much contrast on a page. So again, I'd like to use that principle that when I'm looking at a page, I want to ask myself, what's the most important thing on this page and how can I draw their eye to it? Not, let's just make it pretty. Okay. And that might make for a proposal that is a little blander, I would say, but it's easy to find, it's easy to consume. And that's really the goal, not to be cool. Not that there's anything wrong with being cool. Repetition. In general, you want to repeat visual elements of your template and design throughout the document. You repeat colors, sizes, shapes, textures, spatial relationships, fonts. It's obviously good from a brand perspective because it helps your reader recognize the brand and also helps them find things, help them recognize items that are similar, even recognize ideas that may be tied together depending on how effectively you use repetition. Repetition is one of the reasons that hierarchy works so well, and it's really important to have that. If I'm looking for a particular section of a document, if I'm repeating the hierarchy page to page throughout the whole document, it's easy for me to know where everything sits in our line of thinking. And it's just much easier for me to consume and find things. Conversely, and I've seen this, if you have a page where the design isn't similar, it isn't repeated throughout the document, like you have bullets that are different from line to line, your spacing's off from line to line, your alignment's off from line to line. A, it looks sloppy, and B, now it's hard for me to get those repeating elements. It's hard for me to tie things together. Much better to just keep it simple, keep it the same. There's nothing, there's nothing wrong with repeating yourself. And I would say the same thing goes for things like imagery. That, if you have imagery that is inconsistent and thrown out kind of willy-nilly, and icons are a good example of that, because I see people use icons, but then they'll use 3 or 4 different kinds of icons, and it's kind of like, it looks like you just found them on the internet, which is probably what you did. Better to have images that are tied together, and it adds to that branding, which is all about repetition. So, for example, if you had icons that are clearly from the same family and they sit in the same place in your document, then they're easier to consume and they support that whole repetition. And again, any good document, going back to this, a document like this, without even seeing the content, you can tell that it's tied together. You can tell that they've used really good contrast, really good use of repetition throughout this document. So that's what I'm talking about. Alignment. I do so much lining up of things when I go in and fix documents. It's funny because people don't seem to understand that our eye likes a clean line. When things are kind of scattered, we don't like that. We like things that are aligned one way, center, this way, this way. We like that. Our eyes are not naturally drawn to that, and it looks cleaner to us. It looks like more thought went into it, more care took in the placement of things. So when we see a document where that isn't the case, and this is a pretty good example of that, you can see that the text isn't consistent. We've got this is Calibri. I don't know what this is, or maybe a different color or spacing, and this isn't lined up quite right. And the headings don't really line up quite right. It's sloppy. We don't like that. Instinctively, we want to make patterns. We want things to line up. It's why, this would be better than that. Although that's just way, way, way too much text. So alignment is one reason that, something like a cover page is really important. This is not well done. You can see this is centered. It's not even quite centered. It's actually got more space over here. It looks like somebody tried to center it and didn't. And then this isn't lined up with anything, and this isn't lined up with this. It's close, but they didn't bother to fix it. And if all I did was align things, it would be better. Although this looks very high school graduation, invitation. It's not a very sophisticated look. I don't usually push people towards center alignment because it's the weakest. It's harder to do various things with it. Better to have everything in one place, for example. This cover is much better than that cover, objectively, because things are lined up. It's easy for my eye to process this and go straight down. And you can mix alignments too, where now you've got these items are kind of mirror these items, right? But the key is they're lined up in a similar space. This margin is the same as this margin, for example. So again, we like things that are lined up. This is another kind of bad example where things are scattered all over the page. You've also got this text break here where it's wrapping around the picture. I don't like this. The reason I don't like this is because it's harder to read. And we'll talk about readability in a bit. But every time you read a line, your eye travels left to right, and then it goes back to find the line. And to the beginning of the next line. And when you move that line around, it's harder for you to find it, and it takes longer to read it. It's why one of the reasons center alignment is so poor, because that left edge is constantly moving. So that's not optimal. And I don't really like how the pictures go back and forth on this either. A much cleaner look would be to do this. It's all the same information. I've not changed anything, except I lined everything up. So now I can see the team in one place, in one column. I can see their qualifications, and then I pulled out a few things and put them in bullets. Okay, this is using really good alignment. It's using contrast because the photos contrast more out. They pop out. They have some white space, which is great. And with bullets, that's usually a proximity thing that I can tell they're related to each other. They're grouped together because of proximity. Let's talk about proximity. Again, we don't like things that are kind of scattered hither and yon. We like things that are lined up cleanly. Okay. If I look at these items here, I can tell they're related because they're long comma and sentences. But again, using proximity, I'm going to pull them out on their own. And I know they're related to each other because the bullets are the same. And then if I pull these out, I can tell that these are related to this, right? They're subpoints of this. That's why bullets work. Not for presentations. Don't use them for presentations. But for a print document, that's why bullets are so effective. Is they make use of contrast and proximity. This is one of the things that kind of drives me nuts. I see this sometimes. According to proximity, I know things that are closer together I assume are related. So is this heading related to this below it or not? Because it's closer to the paragraph above. It's kind of sloppy because it causes a bit of a disconnect. Better, well, this is a little better because then they're in between. But this is best because I can see clearly by not just placement, but by proximity, what this heading is related to. In terms of body text, I think, and this is kind of an unrelated point, but it needs to be consistent. One of the things I do see sometimes is people will paste in text from other documents, and it'll keep the formatting from the source document, and it makes for this. It's not good. So let me kind of pivot away from contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity, and I'll give you some examples of where they may play out. One thing I tell people is don't use the default tables. This is a side point. Don't use Microsoft default tables because everybody knows you're using them and they're not really very good. And I wouldn't really kick it old school with tables either because, again, this has very poor contrast. This has kind of, it's a lot of dark space. So what do you do with your tables? And this is a good example. I wanted to create this, but I found it. So I'm giving credit to Dark Horse. I'm going to apply those lessons that I just talked about to improve my tables. So here's my starting point, okay, for a table. First, I'm just going to remove the colors. I'm going to remove the grid lines. I'm going to remove the fills. I'm going to remove the border and the bolding. I'm going to left align the text. Left alignment is for text is absolutely what you should be doing in your tables. And then I'm going to right align the numbers. And you can center align these if it makes sense, if the numbers are kind of very similar. This is a pet peeve. Now I'm going to align the titles with the data. That should always be the case. I often see center aligned up above and then left aligned below. No. Repetition, proximity, all that stuff, left align up. And I'm going to right align the title with the data. Then I'm going to resize the columns so that they fit better. Then I'm going to put some white space to work. And what white space does in this case is now I'm using, again, proximity, and that I can see that these items, and these items are related to each other just by the spacing. I'm going to, use more consistent precision, and that's just a editing thing, and round the numbers a bit. And then I'm going to remove items that are repeated that don't need to be repeated. Because I can tell already that these are all sub to this, these are all sub to this, these are all sub to this. I don't need to repeat it. And it offers me, now I have more white space, and now these contrast even more than they did before because they're long. I don't like Calibri, so we're going to get rid of that. Then I'm going to add back the emphasis where I want it. Okay. So I'm using repetition, I'm using proximity, I'm using alignment, and and contrast. All in this table, and we went from here, which is kind of a bland table, which is harder to process, to that, just by applying the rules that I had. So don't kick it old school with your tables. Now I'm going to talk about readability. Because there are a lot of design rules about fonts, paragraphs that people don't always understand. So let me try to explain a few, but understand that it's all designed around the idea that we want to make things easier to read. That I care less about about making it look cool on the page as I want it to be easy to read. So first, I hear a lot of people would like to fully justify text. And we don't fully justify text because it's harder to read. There's data to back this up that says the software that's designed to do this puts tiny spaces in here and there in less than predictable ways, line to line, and it's harder to visually consume. So it is not optimal. Ragged right, which is what is on the right here, fully justified left, is best practice for most body copy. Unless you have typesetters who, and nobody does, there's really no reason you would fully justify text. You get a bonus in this too, in that you get a little added white space in the right column. And white space is a good thing. In the fully justified, you have just as much white space, but it's basically made gray space in the middle. It's kind of hidden. Whereas if you left justify it and leave the ragged right, you can actually make use of that space. So that is why you don't fully justify text. It is harder to read. You can still do it. It's not significantly harder. It's not the kind of thing where, I'm just never going to read this. I'm just trying to make it easier. And a lot of it is bit by bit. And I think people have become more accustomed to ragged right than they did years ago. This is a battle I've been fighting for 25 years. And back in the day, I had to explain it a lot. Now, everybody's pretty cool with it. Yeah, and don't do this. Don't ever center your text. So you can center headers if you really want to, although I don't recommend it. But if you, again, going back to the whole idea that your eye is going to travel across a line and then go back and find the next line, if you keep moving the target, it takes longer to consume. It can be, that really is harder. You don't do that. Why don't we use all caps? I always like to ask people that, and some people will say, because it looks like you're yelling. Well, yeah, it does. So there's that. The other part of it is, when we read, we don't actually read every letter. We read the shape of the word. So it's why you've seen people jumble, the words around a little bit, and you can still understand it. It's because you're reading the shape of the word. And the reason being that if it's all caps, all words have kind of a very similar shape, top and bottom. Whereas if you're looking at the ascenders and descenders, which is what these are called, the little bottom of the G and the top of the B, those are ascenders and descenders. You can make use of those, and it makes it easier to read. You can read much faster when it's not all caps. We would only use all caps for headers, and then I would even use them sparingly personally, but they're fine there. But I wouldn't use them anywhere else. I wouldn't use all caps anywhere else, unless you're yelling. And you can see. I mean, if I gave you a document and let's blow this out to a page, then you would be able to read the one on the left before you could read on the one on the right every time. And actually, funny enough, the same thing goes for bolded text. I like bold text. I think it's great, but it should only be in bits and pieces. Again, it should be used for contrast rather than for long stretches. Sometimes people want to bold whole paragraphs to make a point. You don't need to do that. First of all, your point should be strong enough that it's apparent without the bolding. And second, if you really want to have it contrast, I would pop out maybe a few keywords, or use a different tool. Maybe use color instead of bolding, because it obscures the shape of the words. It's just a little harder to read. And don't ever underline text. We used to underline text because we had typewriters, and the only way that we could make something stand out was to put a line under it. And now we don't. We have other things. Because we have computers, we can bold something. We can make it a different color. We can make it a different font. We can create contrast in more readable ways. The reason you don't underline things is it obscures the bottom of the word. It obscures the descenders, and you've taken half of the shape of the word away. So it takes longer to read. This all sounds silly, but it's true. All this is all about readability. You can actually buy a little size too if you use lowercase as opposed to all uppercase. That I think this font here is 54 and this is 72. And they actually take up the same amount of space left to right. But it's a bolder word. Anyway. So if we were in a room together, I would then ask you to do an exercise, and that exercise would put to use contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. But I'll just run through it for you. So these are 3 actual pages of one of the first proposals I read from Plante Moran. And it is horrible. It's not consistent. It makes poor use of contrast. It's aligned all over the place. And it's really hard for me to tell, for example, where this reference ends and this one begins because of the proximity. Like it's right here instead of, spaced nicely like it is here. So what would you do to fix that? What would I do to fix that? Well, I would try to make these horrible logos. I would either not use them. I probably wouldn't use them because we probably don't have their permission. But I'm going to line things up better. I want to have these items lined up. I want to have this lined up. I want to have a stronger contrast with the headers. And I want to make sure that they're grouped together. And this is one way to do that. This is the same information that's on this page, only I think it's just one reference, not 2. And I would probably just put each one on a page. But these items are clear for navigation, right? They contrast well. And they're spaced evenly, so I know what's related to what. It's pretty evident and clear. It's just a cleaner look. And all I've really done is add some contrast and line things up better. That is about it. And you can do it differently. There's all kinds of ways that you can do it, kind of to the same effect. And I don't know which one of these is best. I think I probably like that one best. But now we're down to opinion. Because they're clearly aligned now. They clearly have the right principles in mind. So that's how you apply this. When you go through a document, any document, you should be asking yourself, is everything lined up on a page to make sense? Do I have contrast in the right places? Am I drawing their eye to what I want them to see? I saw a proposal recently where it was from another firm, and the biggest things on some of their pages were things that were entirely not important to their idea, didn't support their idea at all. It was like more branding stuff. And I thought, boy, they're really losing an opportunity, because they've got some good stuff buried in here, but I can't find it. I can't find it because they put all their contrast and repetition, for that matter, because it was a theme that I saw throughout, on the wrong thing. They were essentially putting their brand above their proposal, which is kind of peculiar. I'd not seen that much. But that's the kind of thing that you should be asking yourself. If you do nothing more than put the contrast in the right places and line things up properly, you will absolutely create better documents today. And when you edit a document for somebody, if you can do those things, and when you get pushback, explain why you did them, then that's going to give you more leverage. It's one of the reasons why with the color thing, for example, the guy that I used to work with, he wanted color everywhere. And we went through examples of that. And I pushed back until he got it, that, now I get it. We can't have them looking everywhere. On a page, they might only want to find one or two things. Let's get it color there. Because Nancy Webb will tell you that the eye is drawn to color like a fly to or like a moth to a light. And that's true. That's true. So think about that when you're putting documents together. Okay. I'm just going to go through some quick hits of other things that you should keep in mind when you're designing a page. Keep it simple. Simple designs in general are going to help you convey complex ideas. I used to work with a designer who created some really cool stuff, but I didn't understand any of it because it lacked clarity. That person wasn't a particularly good editor of their ideas. And so it was evident in the design. When you're designing a page, keep things simple. Keep things orderly and so that people can find them. And remember that I know less is more, less isn't more, but less can be better a lot. There are most cases that I think in terms of design, I think, okay, this is probably too many pages. Can we reduce them? Okay, there's too much on this page. Can we split this information up in a different way? We've got 3 paragraphs to describe something that I think we can probably do in one. Can we do that? White space is good. You don't have to fill every inch of a page, even when you have page limits. When we get page limits, what I usually ask people to do, or what they'll ask me to do, is can you go use a smaller font? Can you reduce the margin? Here's the thing. When somebody gives you a page limit, that's not a challenge. Nobody's saying, how many words can you get on a page? They're saying, give me less. Can you just give me less? So give them less, less is more. Don't ever use clip art. If you have friends who use clip art, stop them. Just don't use clip art. Clip art screams 1986. Well, maybe 1991. I don't know. A long time ago. Don't use clip art. It does not make you look like a professional. It makes you look like an amateur. Better to use really good photographs, right? If I'm trying to convey that we need to find a new way, this would be a good graphic, right? It's a good, I'm going to find a way, a picture. Find good photographs. Find good imagery. Make sure that you're using quality ingredients in terms of your graphics, your icons, your designs, your fonts. Your design will only be as good as the ingredients that you put in them. So, keep things in perspective. This drives me a little nuts, but when people will often resize diagrams and pictures to fit the space that they're going in, that is not best practice. If you can't, either find a photograph that fits the space, or just use the one you have, and don't stretch them. Even if you stretch these a little bit, people notice. People notice. Yeah, make sure this all fits. Make sure that when you do things like in tables, that you don't have words that split like this. Either use an abbreviation for this, or widen the column, because it just looks ridiculous. That will stream out to you. And then I would say to always keep in mind that it goes back to your eyes. It goes back to how your eyes process information, okay? So when we apply good design, your eye will be drawn to the things that fit the pattern that you are creating with contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. So always try to think in those terms, and you can explain it in those terms, you're going to be better off. So you may be wondering why I did that introduction the way that I did. And the reason I did that introduction was by revealing a lot of things that I have about myself, I almost certainly have something in common with everybody listening to this, right? And when you have something in common with somebody, then it's the first step to building rapport. And rapport is the most important thing in our business. People buy on emotion and they justify with logic. They buy from people that they like, that they have things in common with. And you need to find ways to use that knowledge to build relationships with the people who are buying our services, and the people that you deal with professionally. So it's not so. My wife says, "Boy, you talk a lot about yourself." I'm like, "Yeah, I do it in like a minute, though." And if I can help build some level of rapport with somebody because they've been to India or they play an instrument or they like Peter O'Toole too, because who doesn't? That's why I did that. So, with all that said, do you have any questions? Amjad, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. I think few of the places that what I have experienced writing proposal responses from colors combination. I think as what I can understand as a branding, you should have your company wise some certain colors and you just stick with that, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think when in our proposals, we have a color family and a few primary colors, and then a few colors that we'll use to highlight them. And we don't usually get too far away from those. I mean, we might if we have a really complicated diagram, but if you have a good design palette, and I think any firm should have more than just like one color. But if you're picking from one primary color, maybe two primary colors, and then some support colors, that should give you plenty to create any business diagrams that you need, and headers and icons and things like that.
Okay. And what is your opinion about using images through the proposal, especially in your technical solution? Like, should we have at least one relevant, some sort of, even it's not precisely fitting into that, should have some images, some sort of like to just translate language into some graphical presentation?
I think images always help you, but I think a lot of it has to do with what you're, fitting the situation, fitting the document. That you don't want to throw in an image on every page just to throw an image on every page. But if you can find a good one, for a page, then yeah, put one on. And if it's for technical stuff, I think diagrams become really, really important because some things are really, really hard to describe just with words. Show me, right? Yeah. I would rather see a diagram that, okay. It's the reason why, we'll have a work plan diagram at the, if we do an IT assessment, let's say my company does IT assessments, that's like a 4 or 5 step process, and we have a work plan that's, probably 6 to 10 pages that, we will address everything that we're going to do in detail. But what I know they're going to look for is just show me the steps. Just show me the 5 steps or stages, right? And then I can read the detail. That's really good use of a diagram to make something complex really simple. And if it's technical data or, schematics or things like that, you have to for some technical stuff.
Okay. And as you mentioned that, I think I understand, justify should not be used when you have the contents, especially a lot of contents, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't use it. I mean, that's not a hill I would die on, because I know people who just really, really want that. But I think two things. One, it looks a little dated now because a lot of people have gone away from it because it's harder
Yeah,
to read. So
I
I
don't
would
use.
usually just recommend left justified.
Yeah, and also, what should be the combination of headings? Like, let's say I'm writing proposal response, and I have like a fourth level of headings. So should I start with the heading, like a primary heading? Let's say heading name, I say proposed solution. So should I make like 18, 16 something, and then every subheading goes to point less than the parent heading to make a
I,
revision?
yeah, I think that's a good methodology. I usually wouldn't want to go any deeper than 4 levels because I think then the hierarchy becomes kind of meaningless if you
Mm,
end up with 5, 6, 7 levels. I think the important thing is to make sure that your headings pop out, that they are big enough. The one thing I would say is most people probably err on the side of too small than too big.
yeah.
And I think something like I think our primary header ones, it might be 24 or 28 point font. And then I think we're down to 18, 16, and 14 or something like that.
Okay.
But I think having some sort of methodology like that is a really good idea. And it's a good principle to go by. And then if you change brands, you can just apply those principles and, keep consistent.
Okay. Yeah. That's. I think I just want to, make sure that what I'm saying or what I'm using is.
Oh, you got it. And another thing you might do is use a different font. So, for example, for our headers, we use Lato, and for our body text, we use Rasa, which is a serif font. And so, sans serif headers, serif body copy, and that just makes for more contrast. The key there, though, is then to not go nuts. To have two fonts that really do look different from each other in terms of your headers and your body copy. But then you don't need to add any more. You don't need to add any more fonts. Don't have documents that have 3, 4, or 5 fonts because then now your document will look tied together.
So which font do you like?
Boy, there's so many good fonts. I think the classics are the classics for a reason. So I mean, I think Times New Roman and Arial and Helvetica, Garamond, I think they're all really good fonts and can be used pretty much in any business situation. We use, again, Rasa and Lato, and I like those. I think Lato is a nice, elegant, sans serif font, but I don't know that it's measurably better than anything else. So I think some of that comes down to taste, although, as long as you're not too flippant, you're not using script fonts, for example, which are just horrible for business.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think you gave a wonderful presentation or webinar. I think I learned a lot new, to be honest.
Thanks.
So it's I never thought this concept before. And now I see that this is like a very professional role that you need to have it in your team, or you should have, some level of training so that everyone, trying to fulfill that role. So
Yeah,
it's important.
very.
To support um, the proposal writers, proposal managers, actually is supporting all different kind of groups who deal with business development. So you got your capture managers, you got your proposal writers, even your SMEs, or even your technical team, or the candidates, or the employees you are submitting their profile. So it tries to bring all of them together and increase extensive level of collaboration, writing proposal responses.
Nice. And we know that when we're writing proposals, communication is really important. How does your software help proposal writers communicate more effectively?
I think what I see from this tool perspective, that while you are working on it, it gives you real-time communication. And like, let's see, you are in the proposal response and you are reviewing, let's see, one of your SME, and you have not answered your or had did not put the responses for certain areas. So what you will do, you will just write the email. So right from there, just right click, send email. Other way that you want to leave the notes for your other, like from your team, other members of your team, or even for your executive, or even for proposal reviewer. So your notes, your communication is there. So if let's say you are working on a proposal with me, so I will leave a note. Hey, Bruce, I selected this proposal because of I think that these are the reason that I prefer considering this solution, or like that. And other ones say, no, we have this problem with this customer. If we don't want to go with that, so that communication is there. So it gives you all around, like every corner, wherever you think that you need to communicate, it gave you the workplace to communicate. No need Outlook, no need other thing. It's work like social media, it works like a LinkedIn, it works like Outlook.
Nice. I think proposal writing is inherently complex, and it can be cumbersome. How does your software help people do their job more easily?
It does from different angles, and I think from one perspective, I still feel challenged with the web technologies. It does not matter how strong you could be, your tool, but you cannot compete Microsoft Word or any of desktop applications. From that channel, any web-based tool has challenges. But on the other side, how much it can support you writing proposal responses. And like one example is that it automate the process of finding matching responses from your previous submissions. So if you did, let's say you submitted few proposals in past, you don't have to go and find the document, which document you send, which like that. Here you just highlight specific requirement or type your requirement, and hey, I want to see if I had submitted proposal response for this requirement. It bring over for you. And similarly, that if, as I said, like if you need to write response and you are looking for very technical knowledge from your SMEs, or actually maybe from your application architect or some other area, what you need to do, just simply, say this part I want to share with this resource. So you just send the email and put that resource in your proposal team. They had that section, they will put the responses for you, and as moment they do, you got the responses. And from writing proposal responses, it also break up the big documents into very individual manageable requirements. So each requirement, you can generate compliance metrics where you can see, okay, I done this, yes, no. Another side, you also have responses for each of those individual requirements.
Gotcha. I'm wondering how it does that. I know that a lot of content we will reuse. It can be repeated from proposal to proposal. How does your software facilitate that?
We're using some sort of artificial intelligence, some algorithms there. At the back end for the document storage using SharePoint, but on another side with the contents, because each response when you saved in the system, it has its relationship with the requirements. So basically it keeps requirement traceability metrics kind of structure in your system. So whenever, like 5 years ago, you write proposal response and you are searching there, it will say, yeah, for this very unique requirement, you had this response, and that's how you can, find them from your old previous contents.
Nice. Well, that answers my questions.
That's very good.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.